Welcome, welcome. While WaterFire Salute to Veterans is in its 8th year, our COVID conditions in Rhode Island don't allow us to gather the usual tens of thousands in person this year. So the steering committee, co-chaired by Army veteran Dora Vasquez-Hellner and Navy veteran Ted Williams, have pivoted us onto the virtual stage. Today is the first of 2 live panels designed to bring some of our nation's top experts, researchers, and veteran dedicated organizations to the forefront. Today we'll discuss innovative treatments and approaches to post-traumatic stress. And I hope to see you back with us at the same time tomorrow to discuss managing post-military employment success. And Saturday at 8 p.m. is the world premiere of WaterFire's inspirational Salute to Veterans video program. If you're watching us live right now on WaterFire's Facebook page, we'll be monitoring the comment section over this hour, and we would love to have you all participate with your insight and your questions. So please do contribute to this community. My name is Mike Ritz. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership Rhode Island, and I'm also the board president of Forge, which runs the Overwatch Project, a veteran suicide prevention initiative that I'll soon speak about. Recognizing that yesterday was Veterans Day, originally Armistice Day, I'd like to open today with something my grandmother wrote in a personal memoir about her father, my great-grandfather, a World War I veteran. Daddy went to the doctor. He gave him some nerve medicine. I don't know if the medicine had alcohol in it, but he would take more than he should have. His mental condition worsened. He started sleeping with a butcher knife and once came running upstairs with the knife, thinking someone was about to get him. It got so bad that he was admitted to the Veterans Hospital in Battle Creek, Michigan. My grandmother gave me her memoir when I was in the middle of my own Army enlistment in 1997. She writes about many things, but the stories of my great-grandfather's struggle with post-traumatic stress before there was even a term for it really stuck with me. We should all be very grateful that we, as service members and veterans, have such remarkable innovators like our moderator and panels who are discovering solutions today. Our moderator, Casey Woods, is the founder and executive director of Forge, which runs the Overwatch Project. As I said, a unique veteran suicide prevention initiative. The Overwatch Project is coming at suicide prevention from a new angle, using an approach that was successfully used to solve another complex problem, drunk driving. The Overwatch Project is building the equivalent of Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk campaign. Only instead of alcohol and suicide, they're talking about firearms and suicide. 70% of veteran suicides are with firearms. In this effort, the Overwatch Project team works closely with veterans who are struggling, doing suicide prevention trainings and outreach. Post-traumatic stress is one of the biggest risk factors for suicide, and finding treatments that help veterans overcome it and live happier lives is critical to reducing veteran suicide. Please welcome Casey Woods, today's moderator, and I gotta tell you folks, dogged champion in veteran suicide prevention. Casey?
Well, thank you, Mike. As Mike shared, with the Overwatch Project, we are focused on empowering veterans to intervene at a critical moment to help put time and distance between a vet in crisis and the thing he or she might use to kill themselves. With this approach, we're working on the last link of the chain, helping veterans and their families intervene prior to that rock bottom moment so the veteran doesn't take his or her life. But the ultimate goal is to get to the point where veterans don't want to take their own lives. A time when that rock bottom moment isn't happening as frequently as it is right now. And one of the keys to that is more effective treatments for post-traumatic stress. Research has found that unremediated post-traumatic stress is the single biggest risk factor for suicide. And so that's why I'm thrilled, Mike and I are thrilled, and WaterFire, to have this discussion today with 3 innovators who are pioneering new treatments that are having a remarkable impact on veteran lives. If I had to pick one word that really sums up the theme of this panel, it is hope. There are new treatments for post-traumatic stress, and they are working on veterans who have struggled for years, even decades, and who have not found success through other treatments. So I want to let the panelists speak to themselves about their work, which is really remarkable. But I'm going to give a quick preview, introduce everyone, and then we'll be off to the races and we can talk through what these treatments consist of. First up, we have Rick Doblin, Ptsd, who is the executive director of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which not surprising that most people call it MAPS. He has pioneered MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. We also have Dr. Erik Won, who is the president of Wave Neuroscience, and they are treating post-traumatic stress with a new treatment called magnetic e-resonance therapy, which uses a magnetic field to send mild electrical currents to a targeted region of the brain. We also have Dr. Noah Phillip. For all of y'all who are in Providence or Rhode Island, he is local to you. He is a psychiatrist and director of the Psychiatric Neuromodulation Clinic at the Providence VA Medical Center. He's also an associate professor at Brown University. And he is developing a new way to treat post-traumatic stress through a combination of virtual reality and electrical brain stimulation. And so I hope I didn't butcher any of the pronunciation of those technical terms. I probably will do it again. So I apologize to our esteemed researchers on the panel. Want to jump right in. We don't have much time to cover all the things that you're doing. So I wanted to start with getting kind of a baseline. What happens in the brain when there's post-traumatic stress, and then what each of you are doing is remediating that. Erik, I'm going to start with you. It has been described to me over the course of preparing for this panel that post-traumatic stress is like a person is stuck in fight or flight mode. And how could you talk to us a bit about what's going on in the brain and how your treatment works to remediate that?
Sure, thanks. I want to first thank you for inviting me here, and it's an amazing group that we have assembled. But as it relates to post-traumatic stress, we're looking at things, I think all of us through a slightly different lens. In our case, we're using electrophysiologic brain maps called EEG, and it's really kind of shifted the way I look at post-traumatic stress to a degree, in the sense that we're identifying areas of potential disruption or where the synchrony of the way the brain communicates different areas are communicating with each other may change. And there are many studies now illustrating that we tend to see a preponderance of what we call beta waves, which means the brain is firing too fast. And this corroborates with a lot of the experience that this tends to be something of an anxiety disorder. And there can be some changes in the ability to focus, have attention, and concentrate. But it's also enabled us to change the discussion a little bit in the sense that we don't necessarily view this strictly as a mental health disorder. We believe it's not a disorder at all. And in fact, this is more of a brain health issue. And so what we're doing is first getting this brain map, this EEG image. We're running it across a normative database and doing some computational neuroanalytics. And then we're treating those areas of the brain with an FDA-approved technology called transcranial magnetic stimulation. And if we focus attention to those areas of the brain that may be firing too fast or too slow, we do find that there's improvement in function and concurrent improvement in symptomatology. It's also worth mentioning this pattern that we see in the case of having too much beta is part of, I think, the story where there can be what we call autonomic overdrive, where they are in fight or flight. And to be able to modulate those neurons and bring them back to a healthier status is really part of our formula.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to Rick. You have a different approach. It works in a different way, and in some ways, I think what's going on in the brain is the same, but it's treating it in a different way. Could you tell us what you're doing with MDMA assisted psychotherapy and how it works on the brain.
Yeah, Casey, thank you. So the first thing to say is that it's psychotherapy that's facilitated by MDMA. So it's better to think about it as a psychotherapeutic intervention that MDMA makes the therapy more effective. And so what we do know from PTSD patients is there's a hyperactive amygdala where fear is processed. There's reduction of activity in the prefrontal cortex where we think logically, and it's difficult for people to take an event that has happened in the past, but it seems like it's always about to be happening again, or it's never really processed into long-term memory. So what MDMA does in the brain is it reduces activity in the amygdala so that people's fear reaction to difficult emotions and memories is suppressed. It increases activity in the prefrontal cortex so people can think more logically. And it also connects, increases connectivity between the amygdala and the hippocampus so that memories can be moved into long-term storage. And at the same time, MDMA stimulates serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, neurotransmitters, and hormonal release, particularly oxytocin, which is the hormone of love, connection, nursing mothers. It's what builds trust, builds therapeutic alliance. So the drug, in a way, we've had people in our study, some vets have said, PTSD changed my brain and MDMA changed it back. And so what we have, though, is a very labor-intensive therapeutic process that's over 3.5 months. And during this 3.5-month period, people only get MDMA 3 times in 8-hour day-long sessions. And then there's 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions, 3 before the first MDMA session for preparation, building the therapeutic alliance, and then 3 after 3 of these 90-minute sessions for integration after each MDMA session. And then we check people 2 months after the last MDMA session and then 12 months later. And so based on our phase 2 results, FDA declared it a breakthrough therapy for PTSD. And we've just finished our first of 2 phase 3 studies and have really good results there as well. So we're hoping by early 2023, potentially earlier, that we would have MDMA-assisted psychotherapy available as by prescription. And it will only be administered by trained therapists under direct supervision. So it's going to be a clinic setting. And it's also the case that it can synchronize pretty well with other psychotherapies than the ones we've developed, and possibly even with some of the other more physiological approaches like what we just heard about. That the therapeutic process that we're developing can be used to supplement other approaches. So we've got a lot to learn about how to really optimize outcomes, but so far it looks like we're on track for success.
And one thing that you had said, Erik, before we jumped to Noah was, or what people have shared to me, is that often what some of these treatments do, MDMA, I think is a bit different because of the very intensive therapeutic process that comes with it. But that what you're doing, and also the work that Noah are doing, they allow veterans who couldn't tolerate therapy to tolerate it, because it kind of gets them into a place where they can talk about these things and benefit from that therapy. Is that correct, Erik?
That's correct. And so it's been sort of a fascinating journey to see once we're able to allow the brain to calm down and to function, where people are able to improve their levels of concentration and focus. We've gotten some unsolicited feedback from therapists and counselors in the community that it's enabled, for example, marriage counselors to have constructive conversations, whereas before it might have been hard for a veteran to listen or to hear some of the feedback from their spouse. And that, I think, it opened up our eyes that it really does take a village. I don't know that there's one magic bullet, but I think that as we add more tools in the bag that can help, it's really given us a lot of hope in terms of offering not just one service, but more of a village type approach and how we might serve our population the best.
And one thing was sleep too. You had said that sleep was really critical to that. I mean, you can't really, it's hard to tolerate therapy if you're not sleeping. So that was another thing that you said was greatly improved with the people who were in your treatment.
That's correct. We have found, and this is something that Dr. Phillips researches at the VA as well, that with this treatment and with transcranial magnetic stimulation as well, not necessarily just the duration of sleep, but the quality of sleep tends to improve. We're seeing more REM sleep and slow wave sleep, stage 3 sleep, which is the restorative stages of sleep. And to Dr. Doblin's point, there is memory consolidation that occurs. You know, these memories that are stored in the hippocampus go to the neocortex during these slow stages of sleep. And to be able to open up that possibility has been very empowering. And you think about, all of us know what our mood and tolerance is like when we're profoundly sleep deprived. We think about the situation veterans were in, and I can speak for myself when I was on deployment. You're typically operating at night because you have a tactical advantage with night vision goggles. And if you're pulling the trigger at night and you're operating, then you try to sleep during the day, 18 time zones away from your regular environment, there's a profound circadian rhythm disruption that's very difficult to restore. And so I think part of our dialogue is always honoring our sleep, honoring our biology, making sure we're doing all the behaviors that we know are helpful. And that's a whole 2 or 3 hour talk by itself. But yes, sleep is foundational to what we're doing.
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue to Noah, because it turns out Noah is doing more than one thing. He is doing something that is also similar and related to what Wave Neuroscience is doing with Erik. And so they know each other. They've, research has benefited each other's work. Today, to kind of expose everyone to another one of his lines of work, we want to talk to you about your virtual reality with electric stimulation treatment that you're developing, which, as I understand, you are the first and only to do it in the way that you're doing it, happening right there in Providence, again, for the Rhode Islanders on the call. Could you tell us a bit about your treatment? You had framed it to me as that, when post-traumatic stress is happening, the gas and the brake are out of whack, and that what your work does on this front is it helps veterans retrain that brake. So I would love it if you would talk a bit about that and let us know what's going on with the VR piece of this.
Yeah, great. So thank you very much, and thrilled to be here both, and also to be a local representative here. So what we're doing, really, the way that we think about it, and really to echo what's been said a little bit previously, is that I really think about post-traumatic stress in terms of the fight or flight response. And so when folks are deployed and are in places where they need to be working in a fight or flight mode, they're pressing the gas. And they're doing this again and again and again. And this is incredibly adaptive. It's incredibly important. And if it doesn't happen, then there's real problems. So it's something that's very adaptive in one particular context. And then what happens is folks need to come home. And if you've been pressing the gas long enough and hard enough, it can get a bit stuck. And what we do, sort of what details aside for a minute, but essentially what we do is we help people to exercise and strengthen their brake pedal for that fight or flight response. And we do that in a way that that is really quite innovative. And so what we do is we have people come into our clinic, and they answer various questions, get brain scans and such, so that we can see what's going on in the brain. And we have folks go through a combination of virtual reality. So, and this is very immersive virtual reality. So folks are wearing a series of goggles. There's sights, there's smells, there's feel, almost as if someone is in an MRAP or a Humvee as they're driving in Iraq or Afghanistan. And while they're going through this immersive experience, we deliver just a tiny little bit of electricity. And when I say a tiny bit, I mean sort of the amount that you would get if you licked a 9-volt battery. It's a very tiny bit of electricity. And what we do is we deliver that up into the part of the brain that helps people learn that things can be safe, that things can be different. This is that brake part of the brain. And we do this gently. We do this over and over and over again. And what we have found is that it helps people to calm down, both in terms of the fight or flight response, and also it helps their symptoms get better. And one of the really neat things is that even once people are done with this, they continue to get better. And so I really think about it as we're helping the brain to be in a more healthy way, helping people to make changes in their lives, be able to give them that freedom so that they can go out and do the things that they need to do.
Yeah.
Casey, if I could add just one point, I think this thing that you said, that people learn how to process trauma and they keep getting better and better on their own. That's really important, and that's a great part of therapy. And we see that with MDMA-assisted therapy as well. That the results that we have at the 2-month follow-up in phase 2, 2/3 of the people no longer, or 56% of the people in phase 2 no longer had PTSD at the 2-month follow-up. But at the 12-month follow-up, 2/3 no longer had PTSD. So people do keep getting better. And I think it's that's, I would say, fundamentally different what you're trying to do, what we're trying to do, than just giving people an SSRI or a pill, because you're actually teaching them how to heal themselves.
So just to, really to echo and really augment, my goal, my personal goal in this is, finding ways that we can help people without thinking about the standard meds or needles or other things like that are out there, really helping people to get back to their lives, do the things that they need to do, and really harness that internal resilience, right? And that sort of the internal strength that each and everyone has, and really use that and leverage that and use that to help people get better.
Yeah, I think every one of you had talked about how like medication is often about treating the symptoms and not the underlying brain injury. And what y'all are trying to do is developing ways that allow the brain to heal so that the symptoms go away because of that core issue having changed. I know that there's probably people on this call who are skeptical, who are like, this can't be possible. There's no way. I was talking to Rick, and he had a veteran that he treated successfully who had post-traumatic stress since the Vietnam War for 30 years. And so there are skeptics out there. As a former journalist, I always approach everything with a bit of skepticism, but we also have a former skeptic on the panel. Erik, you are a former Navy surgeon, and you were telling me that when you first heard about this treatment, you weren't convinced. And it wasn't until a fellow veteran, someone you served with had an experience with this treatment, that you became a believer and eventually crossed over and are now running the show at Wave Neuroscience. Could you tell that story?
Sure. So at the time I heard about this technology, I was a chief physician at the Boeing company. We build airplanes, but we have little emergency rooms at every heavy manufacturing site. And I should take a step back. Back in 2001, my unit suffered, unfortunately, some of the first casualties of the second Gulf War. And it was a nighttime assault, full squadron, night vision goggles, and a sandstorm obliterated the horizon. One of our pilots, we believe, got vertigo, went nose down, and we lost four of our U.S. Marines and 8 British SAS operators. And I don't think I realized at the time the magnitude that event would have on the rest of my life. But my mission changed at that point to really taking care of 150 of my buddies and sort of the grieving process that we went through. So one veteran in particular who escorted his friends back home for burial, one of the families was understandably very upset, and he had some fairly traumatic events. He got spit on during the burial, and for the next 10 years, really struggled. And we tried everything we could find in the market to help him out, and nothing was really helping much. So when I learned about this technology, it sounded a bit avant-garde. I was very skeptical because so many things we had tried weren't very successful. But he was willing to give it a try, and his change was so profound. It was really quite moving, I think, as a provider, to see hope reinvigorate one of my friends. And the real telling point for me was His wife came into the clinic in tears, hugging everyone, saying, "You gave me my husband back. This is the man I married 10 years ago." And so, sometimes we're very privileged in medicine and science to be able to walk shoulder to shoulder with our patients. And I sort of dedicated myself to this technology since that time. As a scientist, we want to see, is this reproducible, generalizable? And so I sent in a second Marine and a third Marine, and we're seeing this great success. But I think to really answer the question for skeptics, as we all should be, we need to wrap around these innovations, academically rigorous, good science. And so we've embarked upon a number of studies. Dr. Phil has been involved in some of those, and we're with the TMS technology. We were working with U.S. Special Operations Command, Uniformed Services University. We're about a third of the way through that data collection and the Data Safety Monitoring Board, which is an entity that oversees clinical trials. And if they don't see a signal, they'll tell everyone to stop, or if they see something positive, they'll tell you to keep going. We got a green light to keep going, but they recommended that we open it up to civilian populations rather than just the military. So we're now incorporating some universities into that study, and we're encouraged. But yeah, I think with any kind of innovation, the medical community tends to be very slow to adopt. And so we have to, I think, overcome some of these barriers. And I think everyone on this panel, that's a bit of our mission, is to validate and confirm the observations that we're seeing anecdotally.
Yeah. I mean, what is the biggest obstacle right now for you, Erik? And I'm going to ask this of everyone, to success, to getting this to people. What is the biggest obstacle?
Right now it's probably COVID-19. It's paused all of our trials. So that's been a bit of a hindrance. And I don't know if it's proper to view all of these things as obstacles. I think entities such as the FDA, they're there to protect the public, and we have to meet all of those standards. So I would say the biggest obstacle for us at the moment is just the time to get all the data to validate what we're seeing, and then to package that up and give it to the FDA. Because we do see, as I know you're better aware than most of us, 22 veterans a day taking their own lives is just an unacceptable number for what I would view as the greatest country in the world. And so it's kind of a hair on fire. We need to do this as fast as we can. But doing good science takes time. And so I would say that's part of our challenge.
And what does the data say about your treatment? Do you have numbers that you can provide? Like what percentage of veterans are coming out of it and seeing success at XYZ point?
So yeah, we're still unblinded, but the aggregate data we saw from this initial trial was about 83% of people were meeting the primary endpoint. And so we're very encouraged by that, but there's a large placebo effect too that we have to overcome. And so I'm not yet in a position to filter out, how much of that was treatment effect, how much of it was placebo, but it was encouraging enough that we're able to keep going. In our clinical practices and in our pilot study, we saw a similar number. It was about 80% of subjects were seeing a response, and roughly 60% were reaching the primary endpoint, which was defined as clinically meaningful changes in a PCL5 or an RBQ16. So early data, it's not something that is ready for the FDA to review, but very encouraging and promising.
Yeah. Well, I've been listening to podcasts with veterans who've been through your treatment. It's really exciting to hear what they report back, whatever the FDA says. I think, Rick, you have had, you're dealing with a different set of obstacles. MDMA is viewed as somewhat controversial. It has been. I think you told me that you treated your first patient with PTS in 1984, 1986?
Yeah, 84.
And so you've been at this for a while. What have been the unique sets of challenges that you've had to face because of the nature of your treatment?
Well, we've had challenges based on the drug war, which has been justified by demonizing drugs and by blocking research. So MAPS, I started 34 years ago. It took us 6 years just to get permission for the first phase 1 dose response safety study with MDMA. Then we've had a second problem, which is fundraising, because none of the organizations that you would anticipate, like the Veterans Administration or the Department of Defense or the National Institute of Mental Health, have been willing to fund research into drug development with MDMA for PTSD because of the stigma. None of the major foundations either. So we've raised over $100 million in our 34-year history, but all from donors, private philanthropists, without any kind of investors or ownership. So that's been a challenge. There's been a lot of concerns about MDMA neurotoxicity, supposedly, which we don't see any evidence, and we've tested people before and after for neurocognitive consequences, have not found that. So I think the stigma has been diminishing over time, and we are now very close to starting research inside the Bronx VA, inside the Loma Linda VA, and we're working on a group therapy study at the Portland VA. So I think what has happened over time has been a growing recognition that we need new approaches to treating PTS, and that this particular approach is no longer as controversial as it used to be. And we also have bipartisan support from our funders, from Rebecca Mercer to the Koch family to George Soros, the whole range. And we have a lot of support, even on Fox News has been very positive about MDMA research. So I'd say the main challenges right now with Erik, I would say it's COVID, because we need to gather a certain amount of data to submit to the FDA, and that data gathering process has been slowed down by COVID. The other big thing for us is going to be the challenge of training therapists, because it's not just giving MDMA. And so there's, it's going to be slow rolling it out and fully scaling based on the speed with which we can train therapists. And the final part of our training therapists is supervising them as they work with the PTS patients. But because it's with Schedule I drug, MDMA, we can't train people outside of a protocol approved by FDA, institutional review boards, and DEA. So that's going to be our challenges, ramping up our therapist training program and getting the data that we need. But we do have the data from our first of 2 phase 3 studies, which is very, very positive. And so we hope that the FDA, which we're going to speak to in January, may be willing to shorten the approval path because of our outstanding results. But we still have to generate the data that the FDA wants to see.
Right. It's a process. Well, you touched on some things that bring me to Noah, because you were talking about the challenges of training therapists. There's an accessibility issue because of it. It's very resource intensive. And Noah, what you're working on is the VR headset that y'all are developing is something that could actually be sent to someone, and you could do the treatment remotely, which sounds very sci-fi to me. But I'm really excited to hear about it. I know there are people who want to hear about it as well. So tell us how that might look and how it might work going forward.
Yeah. So, and appreciate the question. So I think there's a few things to sort of say and to unpack. And actually, I will say one of the things that, and I echo the challenges related to COVID. Although I will say that, due to some Herculean efforts that are going on here locally, all of our research studies and actually our clinic are open right now. So we are still seeing patients. We're having people come through. There's a tremendous amount of care, cleaning, effort, and otherwise, but we have been able to stay open. And so it's, but who knows with what our local numbers are going. But we really do try our best, because we recognize, fully that we have this terrible thing called COVID, and then we also have this really terrible issue related to PTS, related to suicide, and it's really, we're left with a number of very bad options. And it's really incumbent upon us to do the best that we can and be safe, but also recognize the things that we're actually dealing with right now. As we're developing this technology, I think what COVID has reminded us of is that, you know, the days of, I think it's important that we move our treatments out of medical centers as best we can and into the community. And so our system, which is really, it's a virtual reality plus the little bit of stimulation, you know, really would be it's a headset. It's something that I could you know, ship to Smithfield, or I could ship it out to Iowa. And, you know, it's something that we could send and get out. It's really important to increase access. And so in thinking of the things that really are the sort of the roadblocks and the challenges, one is making sure that we can get this to enough people to test and make sure that it is safe and effective, but also making sure that we're able to lay the groundwork for what's going to come next, which will be sort of large scale deployments. The only other thing just to add into this is sort of one of the other things that we have had as we've been developing this is people often get worried about, I use the word electrical, and people immediately think about electroshock therapy and ECT and things like that, which this is not. Really what we're talking about is a 9-volt battery's worth of electricity. I've done it on myself countless times, as well as everyone who comes into the clinic. But also that there's a fear, right? So we're having people go into an immersive environment that is somewhat reminiscent about what people have gone through. And that's something that we were mindful from day one. And actually, as we were developing what people see in the virtual reality, we did it with a bunch of guys and made sure that we were providing things that were sort of real enough to put the brain in the right state to make some changes, but not so real that would really make anyone upset or trigger or otherwise. I take the do no harm part of what I do really, really seriously.
Yeah, you told me in our call that, like, when you ask people, have they, you know, the kind of charge you get when you look at 9-volt battery, and when you ask that question, all the men know what that feels like, and none of the women do. So,
I'll leave that there.
There's a bit of a gender differentiation in whether that example works. Because I definitely don't know what it feels like to look at 9-volt battery. I don't know about the men on the panel. But I want to talk about, you know, we got about 20 something minutes to go. I want to answer a really important question and then go to a forward thinking view that each of y'all have expressed to me. I don't want to end the panel today without having each of you talk about how people access what you're doing. This is innovative, but surprisingly accessible. I think I was surprised to find out how accessible in certain paths and certain places these treatments could be. So could you tell us, Noah, since you're local and we've got a lot of Rhode Island people, how do people access what you're doing, both in terms of the VR and electrical stimulation, as well as the magnetic resonance treatment?
Right. So in terms of the things that we offer here in Providence, there's a number of options. And I think in the chat box, there's going to be a specific contact number for a single point person to call, whose name is Adam Isval. He's one of our Veterans Engagement Committee members here, because I think we've all had the experience of dialing up a VA or a government institution and you just die in hold space. But how people come in is, so usually what will happen is their treating provider will send me a little message, a consult or otherwise, in the system. So this is for people who are have some sort of connection at the VA. We do have a method to help people come into the VA system if they are new. And so we have specific folks who can help navigate that path in case they have not had contact with the VA previously. Their treating provider sends me a message. It says, hey, this person is interested in this sort of thing, and how can you help out? And I review the chart, make sure everything is safe, and really off we go. And that's largely for the clinical side of things. And on the research side of things, the contact number is there. And And we've talked about the virtual reality work. We do quite a lot of other things that range all the way from sort of totally new device development to various other sort of prevention studies and intervention studies here in Providence, all related to post-traumatic stress and suicide reduction, and really can get directed from that one point person from Adam.
Perfect. And Erik, what about you? How accessible is what you're doing? And we're going to provide links in the chat. But how do people access what you're doing?
Sure. So we have a number of clinics around the country. You can find a list at braintreatmentcenter.com. And so it's close to 30 different centers and clinics where we're adding EEG guidance to this existing technology, transcranial magnetic stimulation. If we're not proximate to somebody who's listening, transcranial magnetic stimulation can be found almost anywhere in the country these days. The VA is using it. There's many other centers, and so I just encourage people to explore it. And if there's questions, they're welcome to reach out to me directly. But that's
sorry to leap in and not to be rude. So transcranial magnetic stimulation at this point is offered in many VAs across the country, and there are active efforts to put machines in every single VA that wants one. And so this is a program that's coming from central office that I've been very much involved in. So I think we're at 27 sites so far. I think I've just looked at the first 700 people who've gotten stimulation across the nation. And so it's there and it's building. But let me pass it over to you and again, apologize for the interruption there.
No worries. Because I think we're all sharing the same message. Right. And the other part in terms of the research realm is we are trying to innovate a more portable unit, something that could be used from home. That's still in the research phase, but this would clearly increase the accessibility to scale of the technology. So we have applied for an FDA emergency use authorization. That's still pending. I don't have any indication what direction that will go, but we're hopeful. So we continue to do the research to try to push that forward. And so hopefully that will certainly improve the accessibility to the technology.
Well, as someone who, obviously watches the suicide numbers, rural suicide, access to healthcare is a huge issue when it comes to suicide and veteran health. So anything that gets us to the point where people can access things when they don't have a VA nearby is really critical. So before I jump from you, Erik, what does the machine look like that y'all are developing? Like what, could you give us a visual, there's pictures online of what you do, but what does the machine look like that y'all are developing that people could take home potentially and use in their homes?
So the home unit it's basically a base, which looks like a stainless steel rectangular box. It plugs into any wall outlet, and then there is it looks like a kind of a bicycle helmet that goes on your head, and then there's a knob on the back that will tighten it so that it'll stay on and not fall off. And so it's pretty user-friendly. People can be trained on how to use it in about 5 to 10 minutes. I've tried it out, and it's a very gentle stimulation. You barely notice it. It's kind of a gentle vibration. In my case, I was quite surprised at how profoundly it affected my sleep. So I'm using the sleep tracker. It's called a Whoop device, and my REM sleep doubled in the first week. And so, one anecdote, but I was encouraged by what we saw there. We're currently undergoing a redesign to make that battery operated, where you won't need to plug it in. It'll just be rechargeable, and we're also trying to improve the ergonomics so that it'll stay more cleanly and we'll get better contact in terms of the stimulation that's occurring. So a lot of different activities that we have going on at the same time. Right.
Well, everyone pushing forward into the future. So Rick, where are you at in terms of people being able to access? I recall from our talk there was about three different ways that if people were in the right place, the right locations, they could potentially access your therapy.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd like to say is to make a distinction in that we will not be able to have people do this on their own in their homes. It's always going to be done under direct supervision. Right now, we have our second phase 3 study is up and running in most of the sites. Some of them are still not open for recruiting because of COVID, but they will be fairly soon. So if people go to clinicaltrials.gov and you search on PTS or PTSD and MDMA, you'll be given a bunch of studies, most of them completed. But if you go to the phase 3 multi-site study, I think it's number 16 on the list, when you do the MDMA and PTS search, that will show the cities where people can enroll in the phase 3 study. Now, when they do that, they actually, though, have a 50-50 chance of either getting therapy with MDMA or getting therapy with an inactive placebo. But what we have shown is that for a significant minority of the subjects, the therapy alone can be helpful to the point where they no longer have PTSD. So I'd like to encourage people to think about volunteering. And we also have, when the study is over, everybody that got the therapy without the active MDMA can go through it again at our cost for free and get the therapy with MDMA. But that has to be after the study is over so that we keep the control group intact. We also have expanded access, which is compassionate use, and people can volunteer for that. There's also a notice on clinicaltrials.gov about our expanded access program. It's not quite open yet, but one of the sites is going to be near Rockville, Maryland, and we're hoping to have people from Walter Reed referred to that particular site. And then the third approach is at Yale, for anybody that happens to be near New Haven. That's going to be a study. It's not really a therapy study, but it's taking people with PTS and giving them MDMA and then putting them in an fMRI scanner to see what happens. But they will have sort of therapeutic support while that's happening, and they're only in the scanner for an hour. So those are the main ways that people can access this treatment.
One thing that was exciting to me that each of you touched on in our prep calls was we're talking about people who are kind of at the end of a lot of years of suffering. I think a lot of you are treating people who have been suffering for years and may have tried everything else and it just didn't work, or it worked poorly. And so you're kind of last ditch to trying to save themselves. But each of you talked about how what you're doing, we could back that out and get it closer to whatever that traumatic event is and actually prevent this post-traumatic stress suffering that goes on for years and often leads to suicide. I wanted to have each of you touch on that because that's also the future. Like if we could have soldiers, active duty military getting these treatments closer to these events, then we wouldn't have these back end stories of people going through years of suffering. Noah, would you want to chat about that?
Sure. Yeah. No, thank you. And so one of the things that we're doing and really developing is we're actually working on a collaboration with some of our local first responder groups to do very much similar things of what I've described here, a little bit of electrical stimulation with some brain training, really at the end of a shift or things along that line, so that we can really get ahead of this. I'm happy to treat people who have been suffering, but I would love to put myself out of a job. And there's a lot of opportunities for prevention that we can do, and this is for veterans, and certainly for other folks who experience PTS and related problems. So yeah, I mean, prevention it's a really important part of what it is that we need to be doing. And really my hope is to be able to offer something for really the wide spectrum of folks who come in from the very beginning to folks who are later on and who are more chronic.
Rick, could you touch on that as well?
Yes. I think it's very difficult to get into the active duty population. I mean, we've been trying for a very long time. we had Senator Rockefeller, Jay Rockefeller, who was on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, help us with meetings throughout the Department of Defense with the Secretary of the Navy, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, the Secretary of the VA. And what they said at the time, now this is about 6 years ago, is that they were worried about working with active duty soldiers because they thought that the need was so great that if they were to permit that sort of research, people would try to self-medicate. And so what we said was that suggests that the need is so great, you should be trying to help these people. But that has not yet happened. But we do hope that that'll happen. And then that also addresses this issue about people worried about losing their disability. If we can get them before they get on disability and help them, that could be really good. The other thing in the same context is that the FDA has required us, if we succeed in adults, and that means 18 years or older, we have to do studies with adolescents with PTSD from 12 to 17-year-olds. If that works, we have to go down to 7 to 11-year-olds. So that's on the same theory, though, of just treating people closer to the trauma. And we also think that the closer to the trauma that you treat people, the less expensive it would be. The fewer treatments they might need, it's not solidified in their psyche the same way. The brain changes that you get might not be as advanced. So we are hoping eventually to move into, active duty soldiers as well. And, younger ages, people closer to the trauma.
One question I know you get a lot is about the addiction issue, about people, it is a medication. I get, maybe I'm misspeaking, or pharmaceutical of some kind, right?
Yeah.
Do people are worried about, because substance abuse obviously it's a big risk factor for suicide. It obviously is self-medicating. So what about that addiction question, right? If somebody is worried about that.
Well, we're working with researchers in England, Dr. Ben Sessa, who just did a study with alcoholics with MDMA therapy. So what we find is what drives addiction is people running from emotional pain. And you sort of quench this emotional pain through alcoholism or addiction to marijuana or other drugs. And if you can help people address how they handle their emotional pain, there's not as much need to escape, you could say, in drug dependence or drug addiction. So also, a lot of people have said to us in our studies, I don't know why they call this ecstasy. Because when you take MDMA in a therapeutic setting, for people that have been traumatized, it's not like you take a pill and your problems go away. You take a pill in a therapeutic context, and then you can bring these traumatic memories to the surface that have previously been overwhelming. And so people don't see it as, oh, this is a fun trip. And we don't see evidence that after the therapy is over, people seek out MDMA on their own. There have been 1 or 2 cases where that has happened, and people reported that they didn't get out of it what they had hoped, because it's not about the drug, it's about the therapeutic context. And we just take the drug and then also they don't know that it's a pure drug. It's hard to say. So the other thing about MDMA is that over time, the effects tend to fade. People don't have as strong a reaction to it after they've taken it a bunch of times. It doesn't diminish during our therapeutic context, but people will develop, long-term patterns of use of alcohol or cannabis or opiates or stimulants, but people don't seem to develop those kind of very long-term patterns with MDMA, maybe up to a year or so. So I'd say that there is a potential for abuse, but in a therapeutic context, we don't see that happening.
Well, that's an important question to answer. I think I have a couple of other questions, but I think we're running out of time. Mike, do we need to wrap so that y'all can do announcements, or?
Yeah, and Casey, these are important people here. We
I
gotta
know.
let these folks get back to work.
I know. I could talk to them all day.
Not that you're not, Casey. Not that you're not.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. So I got to tell you, I heard a lot that I didn't know, and I feel like I'm in tune to this, having got to meet you all before this session. So I want to thank the panelists, Rick Doblin, Dr. Noah Phillip, Dr. Won, for sharing your expertise. And also thank you for multitasking. So as we're participating by voice and video during our session today, they were also in the background answering your chat questions, and then we were kicking them back out on comments. So nice job. That's always helpful. And do check the comments section of WaterFire and Leadership Rhode Island's Facebook pages, because there's more information, there's more links to their work, there's answers to your questions if you haven't seen them yet. And share this recording, please. You know, veterans, their families, other researchers and practitioners, we can all benefit from this conversation and these incredible panelists. And tomorrow, join Casey Woods and I again at noon Eastern Standard Time for managing, oh, there it is, managing our post-military employment success. And we have more extraordinary panelists tomorrow, to include Medal of Honor recipient Flo Groberg. And of course, Saturday at 8 p.m. is the virtual world premiere of WaterFire Salute to Veterans, live streamed straight from their page. And again, please share this session. We never know who in our lives need to hear these approaches and these solutions. So let's all do our best to try to help our brothers and sisters everywhere we can. Be safe, folks, and take us on out.
Thank you, everyone.